So next up, we're going to be navigating privacy and scaling explorations. I'm interested to hear what's going to happen over this discussion. The guys that are standing around the back, if you want to come and actually sit down, again, if you want to stand, by all means. I've said this for the 10th time today. But I'd like to welcome Hodlon to the stage, and he can introduce the panel members, and we'll go from there. And don't forget to ask questions on Slido, and then we'll make sure to get to those.
Yep, let's come on up. Hi, everyone. We're going to be talking about programmable cryptography and the tools that PSE is building after some introductions from the panelists. Tyler, do you want to start?
Hi, I'm Tyler. I go by AtHeartEngineer. I'm a technical project coordinator within PSE, working on TLS Notary, ZK email, and a whole handful of other projects. Yeah.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Vivian Plasencia, and I'm working as a software engineer in the privacy and scaling exploration team. And I'm working on Semaphore, Bandada, and also ZK-Kit. And yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Hey everybody, my name is Sam Richards. I work on a project called MACI, which does private on-chain voting, which we might get into. I'm not this handsome guy up here. I swapped in. I'm the bald guy who's just replacing for now, but excited to chat with you guys.
Yeah, and so again, quick reminder, if you have questions that come up while we're speaking, if you go to Slido, you can put them in there, and we'll hopefully we'll get to them at the end. So can somebody take on the question and tell us what do we build at PSE? Are we building Web3 infrastructure? Are we building products? Are we just doing research? Maybe all of these things, none of these things? Somebody want to take the first question?
So PSE stands for Privacy and Scaling Explorations. We are funded by the Ethereum Foundation. You could call us like a research group within the Ethereum Foundation. I would say we do a broad range of things. We probably have 20 or so project teams doing things from research in different areas of cryptography to building tooling and infrastructure to actually building like user-facing applications to kind of demonstrate what's possible with this tech. Yeah, what would you guys say?
Yeah, so I think our primary goal is getting more cryptography into the world, right? There's a lot of stuff that lives in academia that never makes it to the real world because there is this kind of gap between the people that are capable of writing these academic papers, coming up with these techniques, and the people that actually can program these things and make sure that they're actually secure. And really our goal for most of this is not the immediate blockchain effect of, I can prove something on chain or I can, carry some data on chain. It's really making the second and third order effects that will eventually lead to all of everything being digitally signed or being able to be proved on chain.
And there's one
So-
more panel.
I'd say most people here might be familiar with the term with zero knowledge technology. There's a term more recently, programmable cryptography, that's been come about and been used more often. Can you tell us about what programmable cryptography is, what it means, and how it relates to ZK?
Yeah, so ZK, which most people have probably heard of at this point, zero knowledge, is just one subset of advanced cryptography. So there's multi-party computation and homomorphic encryption, which we're also getting pretty deeply into now. And yeah, the whole idea is back in the day when there was just signing and encryption and HMACs, like very simple primitives, that's all there was. Now there's techniques to make this more generic. So you don't need to understand all the underlying cryptographic primitives that are actually being used under the hood. You can just use something like CIRCOM or Halo 2 and be able to just understand the logic space that you're working in and be able to do practically anything. So you can have parties cooperate together and be able to hide information or just have with ZK, you can just prove something one way, FHE, you can, hide encrypted user data and have other people be able to operate on it without ever revealing anything. There's all kinds of cool stuff you can do, and we're trying to make this readily available.
So I have a question for you, Vivian. Can you give us some examples of PSE projects that are used by other PSE projects within the team, within privacy scaling explorations, and maybe also PSE projects that are used by other projects in the ecosystem?
Yes. We have a project called Semaphore and another called Bandada, and we are using Semaphore in Bandada, and also that's inside PSE. And outside PSE, I will say the SUPAS project is also using Semaphore. So yeah, the two examples of one inside PSE and one outside PSE.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, what's interesting with this new programmable cryptography space, it's very similar to, early projects in the blockchain space of like, you realize we're building these Legos that can kind of plug and play together. And I think it kind of goes back to your first question of like, what does PSE do? Like, do we do infrastructure? Do we do products? I think some of it was just kind of exploring this design space of just like, what use cases come out of this ZK stuff? And like, we don't really know. Let's kind of tinker around and figure out. And learning some of these use cases, like I work on, a voting protocol I mentioned. Sometimes to like build a workable production use case, you realize the tooling for a space doesn't really exist. And you're like, okay, we actually need to build a lot of infrastructure. And I think probably a lot of blockchain projects out there that can relate to that of like, you go out to do one thing and you're like, wait, there's no fucking tooling for this. We gotta build the foundation first to actually enable the use cases on top. But I think through going through a lot of those processes the past few years, we've now kind of assembled a lot of these nice little primitives and building blocks. And Vivian, you mentioned Semaphore, which you work on, which basically just allows creation of anonymous groups. And there's similar projects within PSE that allow for like taking government identity, putting that as a proof, potentially on chain, of like participating in something if you are a citizen of this country, right? And like cool places where that's kind of interplayed is, you mentioned ZooPass as a project that does event ticketing among many other things that's built on Semaphore. MACI is a voting protocol that needs some sense of authentication or Sybil resistance for like, how does someone participate in a vote? What gives them authorization to do that? And we can build, like on-chain gatekeeper contracts that says, hey, anyone who has this event ticket in ZooPass, anyone who is a member of this Semaphore group can participate in this vote. So it's almost these like cryptographic APIs that you can kind of plug into and consume. And I mean, it's one reason we're all like sponsoring this hackathon is because there's a lot of emerging use cases of like, hey, if you like grab this and grab that and plug these together, like that's actually an interesting emerging use case.
Yeah, you mentioned ticketing, you mentioned voting. I'm curious if any of you, if there are any use cases, like real-world use cases, that the tools that PSE building is kind of solving, or maybe should look at or solve within PSE or anywhere in the space.
Yeah. So yes, I will say anonymous feedback, for example. You can send your feedback using Google Forms, but it's anonymous, but not. You cannot prove that you are part of the group. For example, if you want to send feedback here, how you can prove that you are part of the event. So that's the difference. With Google Forms, you cannot prove that you are part of a specific group and then send the feedback. So that with Semaphore, which is a protocol, a CK protocol for anonymous interactions, you can do that. You can join a group and then do many things there, like send feedback or voting or any other interaction. And this way you can prove that you are part of the group and then do the thing anonymously. So that's the difference. So I will say anonymous feedback or anonymous voting or things like that.
Tyler, do you have any?
I think more generally, being able to cooperate in systems and hide your identity is kind of generally like where I want to go with a lot of this stuff. So, Semaphore is a very good primitive for that. But yeah, like ticketing, voting, I mean, like really we're potentially building a lot of systems that like DAOs can use and stuff like that. Like, eventually governments could use these things. But yeah, really a lot of this comes down to being able to protect your identity and be able to cooperate with systems, cooperate with other people.
Yeah, similar to that. I mean, I think generally an exciting area is just like unlocking Web 2 data and bringing that on chain, among other things. I mean, shout out to the TLS Notary folks for doing some of this. But yeah, in the identity space, like I mentioned, of just like if you can prove certain things about yourself in real life, like whether it's taking a government ID, giving a proof about that, but giving it in a way where you kind of have this selective disclosure of like, hey, you don't need to see all the information in my government ID. You don't need to see my specific address or my specific birth date. I can kind of selectively disclose and prove to you cryptographically what things about me actually matter for this specific application. Like just that I'm above 18, just that I live in this jurisdiction, and like empowering applications to be able to, only take like what is the minimal viable information that I need from this user to authenticate them and empower to use this system. And I think just like, for what I think all of us here care about is, right, just protecting our privacy. And I think that selective disclosure is just like a huge empowering primitive.
Yeah, one of the things I would love to be able to do one day is buy a house and hide as much information as possible, right? You need to prove that you make some income and you have some amount of money, right? And you have a good track record of paying your bills. That's it. Right now, you basically have to send a bank your whole life, right? Which is insane, right? They shouldn't need to know my social security number. They shouldn't need to know what I bought last Tuesday. That's crazy, right? They should just know that I'm a responsible adult and can pay my bills. That's it. And I'd love to be able to prove that.
So I want to shift a little bit and talk about your all's experience within PSE and working on projects. PSE has, Sam, you said about 20 projects, say several dozen projects, all in different states. Some of them are just starting. Some of them have been going on for a while. Some have been completed and wrapped up. Some have halfway through pivoted to some other use case and some other thing entirely. So I'm curious to hear about maybe the most important or one of the most important things that come to mind of things that you've learned while working on these projects within privacy scaling explorations.
Yes, I can start. So I will say adoption is very important. If you are building a package, for example, you need developers using this package to get feedback. With this, this is very helpful because you can improve the package in this case, and we have improved some of the projects a lot thanks to that. And yeah, I think that's very important, and the same for applications. So I think adoption is very important to have a solid project.
I agree. It's a big challenge because I think, what attracts a lot of talented, smart people to like a research group, right, is to get to work on really interesting problems. But it really is the classic of just like, let's just build cool shit and assume people will use it. And I think from a lot of these conversations today and probably this weekend, like privacy products in particular are just really interesting from just like a product strategy perspective of like, often you're like adding friction to the user experience when people maybe don't really care about privacy until they really fucking care about privacy because they really need it, right? So like the education and awareness around like, hey, here's why we think this will be useful in the future and how you could think about doing that. So I'd say like a challenge for us or like maybe just learning from MACI is like, you know, MACI's a project that's been around for like 4 or 5 years now. It started as like a Vitalik ETH research post and like, hey, we should do like collusion resistant private voting. And, you know, people built an implementation a few years ago and just kind of like, hey, we did it, we're done, we're good. But like, no one really built on it. And to your point of adoption, it's like, sometimes you can't just like build a protocol and just assume devs will come and use the thing. Sometimes you kind of need to demonstrate the use case and like build something useful so that other developers see, oh, here's a product that was actually built and there's actually demand for this thing. So maybe I should invest my time to also build this thing. So like one thing we've just been experimenting with recently on MACI is like, well, shit, like maybe we should build a usable application and find a good use case to kind of prove that out. And like our end goal is to eventually run government elections on chain, right? And like we think MACI or an iteration of MACI is one way to do that. But it's like, okay, we're gonna pitch governments to adopt this blockchain application and expect them to just use this. We're like, okay, well, first we should probably find ways to like get on-chain projects using it. So, okay, Optimism's running a retro PGF round and distributing grants of, you know, $100 million. We recently like put together a proposal of like, hey, we could build that stack using MACI and make it on-chain and make it private and make it usable. And since then, we've had some small communities come to us and say like, hey, we want to run little rounds on this. So I don't know. We definitely don't have the answers. We're still feeling our way into it. But I think that's been one big learning for a lot of projects in the space is just like that kind of chicken and egg problem of like, okay, like we need users. We believe this privacy tech is really important, but sometimes no one really cares about it yet. So like, how can we make it more of a feature than just like added friction that like, you know, only the really serious people who understand the privacy implications are using this stuff?
Yeah, I think the best education sometimes is showing someone what something is capable of, right? And that's, we're wandering into territory that no one's really played with that much. Like there's, you know, maybe a couple thousand people in the world that really work on ZK stuff deep down. Yeah, a lot of these questions are very unanswered, and a lot of the stuff we build is very low-level primitives, and yeah, if we don't have the tooling on top of that, the infrastructure on top of that, then a developer is not going to even know what to understand and how to use this thing. So we kind of have to start building from the ground up, and then yeah, making demo apps and stuff like that, I think is super usable or super useful to show how some of this stuff is actually usable in the real world. So I'm definitely looking forward to playing with more of our stuff and building more of our stuff out, so it's actually yeah, usable and fun to play with.
How do you make that accessible and understandable to other developers and to end users? And is it the documentation? You know, so often talk about build the documents, you know, as the first place to send people. Have you found that that works? Have you found other ways to engage the community to help?
Yeah, I think it depends on the project. Every project is different. If it's a package for developers, it's different than an application or an infrastructure. So if it's a package, having developers using it, we need a good documentation, code examples, and boilerplate, templates, yeah, make it easier for developers to build with it. So yeah, I will say developer experience is very important for all the PSC projects, and that's very important for that. So yeah, it depends on the project, but for developers, I will say that, and maybe for others, is different.
I think you have to kind of inspire some curiosity from, like, certain devs won't understand a lot of what's going on, but if you can kind of show them, like, hey, this thing is useful and, you know, really unlocks a lot of capabilities, they're willing to work a little bit harder than just like, oh, I'm going to use, you know, should I use this framework over this framework, like React or Vue or whatever? Then you really need good documentation. But yeah, if you have something that's like super powerful, they're willing to do a little bit more work.
I heard you earlier convincing a application developer to learn CirCom. As an example.
Yeah. So yeah, this is a kind of a common problem that we run into is someone comes to us and is like, hey, can we use this library to do this thing? And it's like, well, no, because of this one nuanced thing. But if you knew a little bit more, you could just modify this and do that yourself. And yeah, once you kind of unlock the ability to do things like write CirCom and actually be able to kind of develop your own stuff instead of just like taking cookie cutter stuff some other people have already made, you can do a whole lot more. I mean, it unlocks so many possibilities.
Some cookie cutter and glue.
Yeah.
So if you're a developer in the space and you're wanting to get started, so say there's a developer that does want to get started with advanced cryptography. What kind of background is good for that? What is the best tech stack you would recommend they start with?
Yes. So if regarding the background, you don't need to have a solid math background to start with CK. That's a common question. I think you don't need it if you are going to create CK apps. If you have it, it's better, I think. But if you don't have it, you can just play around with it, and that's fine. Regarding the tech stack, I think that the best one to start is still CirCom and Snark.js, so that's what I think. And for real-world applications, I still think that is CirCom and Snark.js. I think Nor will be nice in the future, but I still think that CirCom and Snark.js are the best for real-world applications. So yeah, let's see what other DSLs appear in the future. So yeah, but for now, that's.
Yeah, I agree. CirCom, JavaScript is probably the best place to get started. Some Solidity background would be good.
So we have some questions from the audience. We're going to spend the last couple of minutes answering those. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. The first one, there's a couple questions in here. I'll just read it out. How big of a concern is security with emerging programmable cryptography, crypto within PSE? So how big of a concern is security, and where does the responsibility lie for auditing, like on the infrastructure, app layer, or both?
It's a good question. It's a tough one. I would say, like, it depends where the project is at, right? Like, a lot of what we do, or what we started doing, right, was just like very early stage explorations and really just tinkering around with stuff. So if you're just building a proof of concept, right, like, you don't need to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for a security audit. But like, if you're putting it out in the world and things are getting use and adoption, like, you need to start considering that. Like, thankfully, like, we do have an internal security auditing team that does at least like help with projects who are looking to, you know, release a public version or what have you. But yeah, security matters in the space, right? Really depends on the application you're trying to build, but
So
you should probably think about it.
Related to that, GM Hacker asks, how can security people get involved with PSE? Are there...
Break our stuff. Yeah. Find exploits. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we have a bug bounty program. Maybe I'm making that up. But
we've definitely talked about it, yeah.
What's definitely cool, I'd say, is like everything we build is open source and is on GitHub, and we have a public Discord, and like we've hired plenty of people who started as like GitHub or Discord contributors, right? Or like hackers who built on our things. So I think like, yeah, just by like opening issues, pointing out bugs, that's a great way to get hired in this space generally, right? Like open source for the win.
Yeah, it's also a great way to learn ZK. Like if you want to dig in on some of the stuff we've written in CirCom to try to find exploits or like under constraints, then that's also a good way to learn. So Semaphore is like relatively simple. RLN is relatively simple, but are super powerful. You can dig in to try to understand like what's actually going on under the hood. And yeah, I mean, we've had people come into our Discord and like drill me with questions about RLN and like, making sure the implementation's correct. And like, yeah, I mean, it definitely comes up pretty often. We concentrate a fair bit of effort on audits. But I think really, if it's not handling money, if it's not got a whole lot of users yet, then you don't have to concern yourself with it a whole lot.
Yes, I agree. For example, Semaphore is being audited. The version 4 is being audited right now, and yeah, since this project is used by internal and external projects, yeah, we think that that's very important. So yeah, we are in this process of auditing the code.
So maybe just to wrap the panel up, we can mention that all of us and other members from PSE are going to be at the PSE booth in the back corner. So if you're a hacker, if you're in the hackathon, or if you have a project or you're just generally curious or interested, we'll be here all weekend. Come to the booth, come ask us questions and see what we're building and how it might be able to fit into your own projects. Cool. Thank you all very much for coming up here and sharing your thoughts and ideas and joining us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.